Welcome back to this session, and this is the final session in our discussion on Marx. We are planning for a short session on a critical appraisal of Karl Marx as a sociologist. You know that in order to evaluate Karl Marx as a thinker is a very daunting task. It's not an easy task because he is one of the most profound social thinkers that humanity has ever witnessed. A person whose academic scholarship, political life, and personal life really it has very few parallels in the human history in terms of the breadth of his scholarship, the kind of profound impact that Karl Marx was able to exert on human history, because he was not only a theorist, he was a political activist. Many of his ideas were incorporated into the communist regimes later, and whether we can agree or disagree, we can argue whether they were correctly understood or correctly interpreted. But for a long time, till the demise of Soviet Union, until the disintegration of Soviet Union in 1990s, till the fall of Berlin Wall, Marx really represented the ideological face of a very important political ideology. He represented the face of a political movement. He represented the face of a very important analytical school, the Marxian school, and his impact, his profound impact on a wide variety of social realms or wide variety of facets of society is something unparalleled, both as an activist, as a scholar, as a historian, as an economist, as a sociologist. So it's very difficult for us to to come to some kind of an evaluation of Karl Marx as a sociologist. So I will be you will find quite a lot of evaluations, quite a lot of assessment on Marx, and quite a lot of these assessments are heavily influenced by the political ideology. The scholars who describe themselves as Marxists, or scholars who have a kind of a ideological leanings towards Marxist methodology, are more sensitive to Marx, or they are more accommodative of Marx. They are more they try to justify the Marxian positions, whereas those who oppose to this political ideology or even academic orientation will be extremely vehement in their criticism of Marx. So here I have borrowed two paragraphs from a book by Jonathan H. Turner on social theory, which he kind of summarizes the contributions as well as the critical points of Karl Marx, and why should the sociologists still read Marx. And you know that the Marxian contribution, it perverts the realm of economics, history, sociology, political science. But since I'm talking to students of sociology, I'll be limiting myself to the criticisms of Marxian criticism from the perspective of sociology. So it's Jonathan Turner. Why should sociologists still read Marx? After all, have not most of his predictions about revolutions and spread of communism failed to materialize? Of course, if you look into the Marxian theory of social change, we know that he was quite categorical. He was quite sure about, absolute about the course of world history. Okay? He saw it as different stages, and he analyzed the capitalist state of economic system, and he was completely convinced that this capitalism has its own seeds of its destruction. It will collapse, it will crumble under the weight of its own contradictions, and it will eventually move to a post-capitalist era, which could be termed as socialist and finally as communism. But we know that nothing of that sort happened. The kind of revolution that Marx predicted did not come true in most of the places. And in places where communism was the state ideology, the kind of socialist economy was persisting for a long time, like Soviet Union, it finally had to crumble down, and the economy gave way to a capitalist mode of production. And capitalism seemed to be the most resilient one. It is able to reinvent itself. So quite a lot of predictions of Karl Marx have not come true. The communist revolution by the proletariat never really occurred. The class structure of capitalist system did not polarize. Okay, the famous argument of Marx that there will be a class polarization taking place. From transition from class in itself to class for itself, that did not take place. We could even now, in retrospect, we could argue that the Marxian understanding of class was rather oversimplified. He could not foresee the kind of tremendous transformations, tremendous complications in the that would have taken place in the capitalist society. The state did not wither away in communist countries. Indeed, only when they turned capitalist, the state became more powerful. The state became more absolutist. The state never kind of represented the wishes of the people. In most of these communist societies, it turned out to be dictatorial. And the ordinary people, the peasants, the workers, their situation was nothing very enviable. And the world has become more capitalist rather than communist. Some contemporary sociologists continue to hold out, arguing that as the capitalism goes completely global, the contradictions in the system will finally emerge and usher in communist revolution. I would personally consider it only as a wishful thinking, because we know that we are talking about a crisis of capitalism, especially since the 2008 financial crisis, and this deglobalization is again being spoken of as something representing the crisis of capitalism. But to say that these crises will pan out in the way Marx predicted, say almost a century back, would be only a wishful thinking, because things have significantly changed. Others have sustained an interest in exploitation and value theory of labor, reworking these ideas to fit more of contemporary conditions. So, sociologists and economists who identify themselves as Marxists, they have a real difficulty in using the Marxian framework exactly the way it is understood by the more so-called fundamentalist Marxists, and then understand. Yet, it must be said that much of the Marxian system of thinking, especially its more ideologically loaded portraits of the future, has not held up. And I personally tend to agree with Jonathan Turner. That's why I thought of using this passage from Turner, the political prophecy, the political project of Marxian thinking or Marxian theory has not really come into effect. At the same time, Marx anticipated. Now we come to the points where Marx is still relevant and a more nuanced understanding or analysis about why Marx is somebody who's still exerting considerable amount of influence and interest among even the contemporary sociologists and political thinkers. So still Marx anticipated and framed many of the issues that occupy discussions of the economy and society today. And it would be very difficult to imagine without the invention of Marx how we would have discussed the capitalist society, how we would have made sense of the contemporary society. It's very difficult to imagine, because the arguments of Marx, the central arguments of Marx, the kind of concepts and categories that he put forward, the analytical framework that he presented to us, has become so commonplace. It has become so influential that it has it has permeated across the schools of those who agree with Marx and those who do not agree with Marx. A host of anticipated framed and issues that occupy discussions of economy and society today. Marx saw, more than any other scholar of the last century, that economy is the driving force of society. And he predicted that capitalism would spread, or in today's vocabulary, become a global force. And no sociologist was able to bring forth the centrality of economy the way Marx did. And Marx is the one, because I hope that you would have by now got some idea about the transition of this discipline of sociology from a philosophical engagement from, say, Montesquieu and others, Tocqueville and Montesquieu, to that of a social sciences, as argued out by Auguste Comte, and of course later consolidated by Durkheim and others. So in this transition, a more scientific analysis of economy, and that has to be the central pillar around which this analysis must take place. And this argument, which is now kind of taken for granted, which is now one of the foundational ideas of social science analysis. This is definitely one of the major contributions of Karl Marx. The driving force of society, and he predicted that capitalism would spread, or in today's word, become a global force. We discussed Marxian analysis of capitalism. We discussed how he is one of the most sharpest analysts of capitalism. He indeed put forward a theory of capitalism. He welcomed it as a necessary stage. At the same time, he was extremely critical of it. He understood capitalism as the most exploitative system which dehumanizes people. Just recall the discussions on alienation, recall the discussions on the surplus value. So he criticized it, he loathed it, but he welcomed it as a historical necessity. And he predicted that capitalism will become a global force, and that has become. So virtually now, with the fall of USSR, what we are witnessing is it's a unipolar world, a world economic system where capitalism rules the roost. So in such a situation, it is the Marxian intervention is extremely important. He understood that economic power and political power are highly correlated, and that those with power could disproportionately influence the formation of ideologies and other elements of culture. And another important, extremely important point, the connection between economic power and political power. We tend to differentiate that in our conventional understanding. We tend to look at each of them, the social, economic, political, legal. We tend to look at each of them as completely independent, separate entities. But Marx would not agree. Marx would argue that you can't understand society by separating the economic sphere from that of the social sphere, or economic sphere from that of the political sphere. So he will not agree for any analysis, any political analysis that focuses exclusively on the realm of politics. He will not agree, simply he will not agree. He wants an analysis of political economy. He wants analysis about how this politics is shaped by the economy. Who are the politically powerful class, and what is the class position? Who are the politically powerless group, and what is the class position? And how is this political arrangement directly or indirectly affects the people economically? And how do the interests of the economically neglected group or economically backward group get reflected in the scheme of affairs in this particular political system? So this interconnected approach, this interconnectedness is a very important argument of Karl Marx. He explained the incredible wealth generating capacities of free markets, but this dynamism is tempered by the inequalities, exploitation and alienation generated by such a system, as well as by the inherent tendencies of the system to cycle in and out of ever deeper recessions and depressions. Another very, very important point. He explained how there is an incessant process of wealth creation takes place, because since the objective of capitalism is to increase more and more surplus value, not the use value, how the capital has to be produced anew, in an endless manner, and the realization of profit has become the most fundamental objective of capitalist system. So this dynamism tempered by the inequalities, exploitation and alienation generated by the system. No other sociologist for that matter is so profoundly concerned with the question of inequality. No other great sociologist is so profoundly concerned with the plight of the powerless, of the poor, of the have-nots. And that is extremely important. And why that a Marxian framework is something so sensitive to the questions, some sensitive to the plight of the poor, is something extremely important. Because that framework has a built-in bias, or it has a built-in sensitivity to look at the questions of the marginalized. And in a contemporary society like ours, where inequality has only increased, the inequality has only increased, that the gulf between the rich and the poor has only increased, Marx is an important reminder. Marx is an important reminder, whether you want to look at it as an ethical question, as a moral question, but he is an extremely important, or even as a political question, he is an important reminder of the kind of inequalities and exploitations and alienation which comes as a part of this economic system. And as well as by the inherent tendency of the system to cycle in and out of ever deeper recessions and depressions. Moreover, he even anticipated the power of big capitalism to standardize activities, to impoverish small business and artisans, and to destroy old cultures in the relentless drive to make production more efficient and to penetrate all markets. So the study of capitalism is a very interesting subject in itself. Why that capitalism is able to thrive? Why that capitalism is able even to co-opt people who really oppose that? How is that capitalism is able to generate more and more demands for consumption? How is that capitalism is able to thrive on the endless consumption of human beings? And why that we create more and more artificial needs? And what is the kind of psychological or the social psychological aspects associated with that? So Marx was extremely critical of it. At the same time, when we are critical of capitalism, it's also important to look at how the way in which capitalism underwent change from the time of Marx. Capitalism was at its very beginning when Marx writes this searing criticism of capitalism. But later, capitalism has undergone change, and it's not very easy to make sense of capitalism, especially what you call currently as the neoliberal capitalism. Very, very difficult to understand. Extremely difficult to understand. It goes much beyond than what Marx described as the problem between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. That simple binary no longer holds. It has reinvented itself. It has invented a major managerial class. It has fragmented this division of workers into different sections, and this whole stock market scenario has completely deconstructed this whole idea of ownership. And with the new startup and new information economy coming into picture, the workers are given the shares. So the workers themselves own the company partially. So the whole classical model of somebody being the owner and somebody being the workers, it's only a partial truth about capitalism now. Of course, you understand, you come across that kind of capitalism still now, especially in developed, especially in developing or underdeveloped society. You will find extremely exploitative systems of working, but capitalism has really grown beyond that, and to destroy old cultures in the relentless drive to make production more efficient and to penetrate all markets. Thus, Marx had a very good sense of many of the outcomes of capitalism once unleashed. Why then did his more specific predictions about the revolution of the proletariat go so wrong? So, I don't think there could be any other sociologist or economist who spent their entire lifetime to make sense of this economic system. But again, we go back to the earlier question that we started. Why did he go wrong? The answer must reside in Marx's ideological fervor. Marx was blinded by his convictions and hence could not see that the state, bourgeoisie, and the workers could change the capitalist system in ways that make it more benign. This is an extremely important position. Remember, when we discussed Marx, when we began the discussion on Marx, a point that I highlighted was that Marx had a political project as well as an intellectual project. As an academic, he believed that the fundamental role, fundamental obligation of a scholar is not to do intellectual exercise by sitting in his armchair, but rather to change. He was completely convinced about the political imperative of an intellectual. So his ideological fervor, his commitment to overthrow the capitalist system, his commitment to see a world which is more egalitarian, and this ideological commitment, many people, or especially people like Jonathan Turner, argues prevented him from having a more objective understanding about the society, a more open understanding about the society that he sees. So Marx was blinded by convictions and hence could not, was blinded by his convictions and hence could not see that the state, bourgeoisie and the workers could change the capitalist system in ways that make it more benign, or at least look as if it is more benign. And as the case we discussed in the previous section when we discussed Marxian analysis of capitalism, a host of subsequent changes, a host of new type of social movements, new concern and preoccupations with identities. These things came into picture, slowly pushing the whole class-based politics to the background after 1960s. And a new wave of social movements, gender questions, concerns with race, concerns with identity segments. So the typical class-based analysis of Marxian hue or Marxian framework is no longer in the forefront of academic discussions. But at the same time, we realize that the foundation for the Marxian school of thought is something, an important contribution of Karl Marx, because he's one person after whose name an entire framework of theoretical orientation has been established. What we generally refer to in sociology as the conflict school or the Marxian school is established after the theoretical foundations of Karl Marx, and it is something quite significant, because the other schools like structural functionalism or symbolic interactionism, they are founded upon the contributions of a number of scholars. But here, it's a Marxian perspective founded by Marx, but later contributed and developed and made more improved upon by other subsequent scholars. So the foundation of a Marxian school of thought, whether it's in history or in sociology or in economics or in political science, it is specifically founded on his solid contributions on social theory. In almost every branches of social sciences, from feminism to philosophy, a Marxian school. And so anybody who wants to engage with the contemporary social reality or social theory cannot avoid or cannot neglect the contributions of Marx. And inspiration to conflict theory within sociology, critical theory, and a host of theorizations of power, dominance, and hegemony. And you will see that the later development of sociology, there was this conflict theory later by Husserl and a number of other people, Dahrendorf and Husserl and others, and the critical theory of Frankfurt School, and of course later theorization by Antonio Gramsci, with their theorization on power, on dominance and hegemony. So each of these are some of the most important preoccupations of contemporary society, important terms, important discourses, the ideas about dominance and hegemony. But a Marxian perspective of this power, political power, dominance and hegemony are extremely important. Even while we think that the idea of power has been redefined, it's always important to go back to the conventional definition of power. Because in many of our current discourses, we are excessively carried away by the kind of a postmodern analysis of power. Power being constructive, power being fluid, power being everywhere. But in that process, many times we forget more institutionalized, more structured, more old-fashioned kind of power as something that was established from a Marxian perspective. And the continued relevance of Marx in the era of late capitalism, where questions of sustainability, inequality, and environmental crisis are debated. Now, whenever we think about the future of the globe, how are we going to sustain, or this growth of economic activity, is it sustainable? Or can we continue with this kind of production consumption? Do we have sufficient resources in order to support us? Or why that we are becoming more and more greedy? Why is that our demands are becoming endless? Why that our consumption is going up again and again? Why that we are becoming least concerned about an equitable distribution of wealth? Why is that we are becoming increasingly insensitive to the plight of the vast majority of the people? In all these discussions, Marx will emerge as an important figure. When we discuss about inequality, when we discuss about the future of capitalism, when we discuss about the sustainability, about the environmental crisis, in all these discussions, Marx will emerge as an extremely important reminder. You can disagree with him. Of course, nobody is expected to agree with Marx in totem. Then it becomes a kind of blind belief. Academics is not supposed to be blind belief. You're supposed to, leaving aside your ideological inclination, you're supposed to have a very, very, very brutally honest assessment of a scholar, and the political affiliation comes only later. And once you do that, you remember the central role played by Karl Marx in some of the most substantive areas of human concern. He was a person who had extremely serious concern for the poor, the questions of equality, questions of exploitation, questions of poverty, and a person who lived his life to explore these kind of very, very unsettling kind of questions. So we will conclude the class here, and studying Marx has been a fascinating experience for me. I hope many of you will also find the discussion on Marx interesting, because irrespective of the ideological position, the life of Marx was inspirational. The life of Marx as an academic is inspirational. The life of Marx as a political activist is inspirational. His commitment, his hard work, his love for humanity is something very, very important. So I would urge you to read more on Marx, read some of his original works, read his other published works on Marx. So it's going to be an extremely rewarding exercise. So we are winding up the discussion on Marx. We will proceed with Emil Durkheim in the next class, in our discussion on the classical sociological themes. Thank you.